Hello everyone and welcome to another video in this channel. My name is Abraham Leal and today we're going to be taking a dive into Bifrost. Now, I am going to preface this by saying I'm no expert in Bifrost. This is one of the things that are in like my, I would call it like my artistic horizon. Like it's the things that I'm looking to learn and implement and just like understand. Because as you guys know, no one knows everything, right? So it's one of those things that I'm still exploring. So there might be a couple of hiccups throughout the video in regards to, I don't know, like computer crashing, some nodes not working, but I'm going to try to do my best to let you guys know a little bit about this. The best documentation I found about Bifrost is directly from the guys at Maya. So you can check those out to learn a little bit about the process. They are quite technical, like they're really long videos or really technical. They explain like every single parameter and things. But it's really interesting. For those of you that are like in the black completely and they don't know what Bifrost is a system. It's a whole like module inside of Maya that allows you to create, as it says right here, complex simulations. But not only that, it's like an instancing. It's like a parameter generating thing. I compared quite a bit with geometry nodes. So you probably guys have seen that Blender introduced geometry nodes a couple of versions ago, and they've been like amazing because you can do like a building and decide how tall you want, how many windows, stuff like that. You can also do that in Bifrost. Both of them work in this like graph function way, so it's a lot of interesting things. The one thing I like about Bifrost that I don't think geometry nodes have just yet is the fact that Bifrost is not only good for like generating assets in geometry and scattering, which is what we're going to be doing today. It can also do simulation, cloud simulation, fire simulation. There's a couple of videos I did earlier this year about fire and the smoke simulation inside of Bifrost. So if you want to check those out, I think they're a good way to just like get in a really basic idea. There's as you can see here, series and things that you can do. It's a really complex system. One of the reasons why I haven't really like gotten a what's the word? Why I haven't really like mastered or tried to learn as much as possible is because it doesn't really apply too much to the things that I do on my day-to-day job. So even though it's a super interesting and super fascinating system, I don't use it as much yet. But hey, who knows? Maybe if we can get to learn a little bit more, I'll be able to implement it in different ways. And today we're actually going to be using a very simple node. So first of all, Bifrost is something that you can find under plugin editor. So settings preferences plugin manager. And you look for Bifrost, you're gonna have all of these things. I just loaded everything to make sure that we have all of the necessary tools. I don't usually have this in auto load because the more plugins you have enabled, the longer it takes for Maya to open when you first open it. So this is one of the heavy ones that takes like, I don't know, 15 extra seconds to open. So once you have this up here, you're gonna have a little bar. As you can see here, we have like the liquid, aerial, which is for smoke and fire, emitters for particles, collider, again for particles. There's, again, a lot of stuff. But the important thing is this one right here, the Bifrost Graph Editor. You can also find it here, Windows and Bifrost Graph Editor. And if you go into here, you're gonna see these two things. And I remember the first time I was learning like the basics of Bifrost, it was like, what the hell is this? So it's a really interesting way. It reminds me a lot like a factory, right? So imagine like a big factory, and you have the gates where you go into the factory, and then you have the exit gates where the product leaves the factory. Well, that's what's happening here. We're gonna input things into the graph, and then the graph is gonna output those things so that we can see them on the scene. So inputs, as the name implies, is just things that we can get inside of the scene, and outputs are things that we can get outside of the scenes. But we're actually not going to be using this. I'm actually referencing one video from the Maya Learning channel, which again goes really in depth about the scattering thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my pan low poly, which is the low poly version of our breath, and I'm going to middle mouse and drag it right here. What this does, it creates a reference. As you can see, it's a mesh reference, and it's referencing this specific shape right here. And now that we have this thing here, we can start building elements inside of our system that are going to allow us to see, well, things. Now, for us to see things, we, again, going back to the factory example, we need to have an instruction that says, hey, whatever is being generated here, give us an output. And the thing that they recommend is the terminal. I just click tab, which is the key that's side of the queue. And if you hit tab and you write terminal, you're going to find this one right here. And the terminals are a really good one. I still don't understand why this is so important, but most of the examples that I've seen about Bifrost uses the terminal because I believe it's they say it's like self-contained or something like that, so you can have multiple terminals. I don't know, something fancy is going on, and the reason and the terminal that's why the terminal is so important. So, I'm gonna try to keep this again as simple as possible so that everyone can follow along. I am gonna make a one comment though before we continue. This is heavy. It is like performance heavy. So I know that some computers might not be able to do it. My laptop, I was actually trying this yesterday, crashed when I was trying to do the tests. So you might want to like just keep that in mind. I mean, the worst that can happen is Maya crashes. Just save constantly, and you should be fine. So the first point that we're gonna use, I'm gonna drag a line. I'm gonna press Tab key. Don't drop the click because if you drop the click, nothing happens. So you keep this clicked and then you press Tab. And now that you have pressed Tab, you can write. And we're gonna create something called scatter points. There we go. So the scatter points function, this is gonna be the core of a whole element. What we want to do, if we go back to our pan de muerto, you're gonna see that one of the characteristics of the bread is that we get a lot of sugar. There's a lot of sugar on top of the bread, and even though we could texture it, it's never gonna look as good as if we actually have all of the like molecules, or well, not molecules, the little grains. Is that the word of sugar? 1 second. Sorry, I had to take care of an emergency meeting here at the studio. But yeah, so what I was mentioning is that one of the things that make this look really nice is the sugar. And yes, we could texture this and create an interesting effect. But we're never gonna be like having the actual like little bits of sugar covering the whole thing, right? Now, some of you might be like, well, I could place them, right? I could grab one little cube and just place it all over the place. But that's why the scatter is so good here, because we're gonna be able to actually do it in a more procedural way. So in order for us to see what's going on, we need to use something, another node called the, it's the point scope. There we go, point scope. So the point scope is pretty much just to see what's going on. And here in the terminal, we have three things: diagnostics, proxy, and final. I'm going to plug this into proxy because we just want to see this on our viewport. We really don't want to see it on the render. We don't want to see the points on the render. And look at this. As you can see, we've created this very, very cool looking pattern where our bread is getting all of this points. Now, again, I'm not going to go super in depth about the like all of the properties here. Let's close this so that we can. So let me. There we go. I'm gonna dock this here. And that way we can see the little bread on this side, and we can work on the graph here. So the scatter is what's doing like all of the magic here with our element. And you can see that we have the amount of like grains of sugar that we're eventually going to have. Right now, they're just points in space, right? It's just an information of where this thing is. But if we change this to, I don't know, like 50,000, it'll be quite a bit. And you can see how the points start covering every single thing. Now, the colors that you're seeing are actually the normals that those points are facing. So they are taking the information of the curvature of the object, and they're orienting themselves to get a different sort of effect, which is again quite cool. So if I were to render this, we're not going to get anything because again, these are just points in space, and we're only plugging this to the proxy section, which again is not exactly what we want. So what I'm going to do now is I want to create, or well, I'm going to talk about the scatter real quick. There's three modes: random, blue noise, and blue minimal. In the video, they explained the blue noise is really good for things where you want to create something that looks a little bit more organic. Still random, as you can see, it's still random, but it's a little bit more organic. And there's like a bunch of different things that you can do here. Again, I'm not gonna go super in depth, but you can change like the density, where they want, or where they're gonna be, how they're gonna be like oriented and stuff like that. In our case, I think just going with like a random noise is more than enough to get this sort of like a sugary effect. We can of course increase the intensity here. We can change the seed to get like a different random variation. And that's pretty much it. I just want like a general glazed cover on top of the whole thing. Now, to actually generate the geometry that we're going to be using, I'm going to be using cubes because if you look at sugar crystals, you're going to see that most of them are quite geometric, as you can see right here. Technically, we could build like each specific with displacement and everything and make it really, really complex. But we're going to keep it really, really simple because because again, when you see like refined salt, you're gonna see that it's pretty much just like geometric cubes all over the place. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna press tab and I'm gonna create a for each. For each is a very common like scripting or programming like thing that you can use that will do one specific action for each element on an array or in a group of elements. So in this case, if we go here to the Bifrost graph, we have this scatter by number, right? So we have 50,000 points on the scatter. And what I want to do is for each of these points, I want to do something. What is that something? I want to create. It's called mesh cube. Create mesh cube. So we're going to create this mesh cube and we're going to output the mesh cube. That's it. That's all we need to do. Again, we can do crazy things inside of here, but I want to keep this simple. So we have this little array that's going to be creating points pretty much everywhere. Now, if we go back to the scatter by number, I'm going to use something called create instances. Okay. We're going to create instances where on the points, of course, and what are we going to instance? The cubes. For each point, we're going to instance one cube throughout the whole element. Now, these instances, we can also bring them into the proxy, and you're going to see that we have the cubes all there. We have 50,000 cubes, because remember, we have 50,000 points, so there's 50,000 cubes covering our bread right now. I'm going to save this real quick, because again, as I mentioned, 50,000 cubes, it's quite a bit of geometry. It's 200,000 faces, or not more than that, but 400,000. So we need to play around with this, guys. So if we take a look at the main problem right now is the fact that the cubes are looking really, really weird. So I'm going to go to the for each, and if we go to the create mesh cube, you can see that we have a specific effect right here. I can make this smaller. So if I make this 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1, you're going to see now that my cubes are way, way smaller, and we start getting this sort of, again, sugary look or sugary effect. Technically, we could, again, here in the dimensions, you can see that we have a length, width, and height. So I'm going to show you something really interesting. I'm going to call this a random value, okay? And it's a random value between, let's say, 0.1 and or let's say 0.5, 0.05, and 0.15, okay? So we can get this random value into the length, the width, and the height. And technically, each one of these cubes is going to be slightly bigger or slightly smaller. I'm going to make this a little bit more intense. Let's do like a 0.3. You're going to see how some of them are really, really big and some of them are really, really small. Some of them are like a little bit longer. There's going to be like a little bit more variation. And again, if we change the seed, you can see how the seed changes. Actually, right now, I think it's doing the same thing. Oh, that's weird. But yeah, like this allows us to control a little bit more of the effects. I do feel like I'm seeing that sort of like variation. I'm gonna go back to the main graph, and here on the create instances, there's this selection mode called sequential. I'm gonna say random. That should give us again a slight little like change there on the way this is working. I think it's working. So now, I mean, that's fine, but it's a little bit too much. So we need to go down here again into the graph and say, hey, you know what? Maybe we're gonna go maximum like size is gonna be 0.15, so that we do see the grains of sugar or the cubes of sugar, but it's not as intense. As you can see, there's a little bit of overlap. There is a way to change that overlap. If we go back to the graph right here and we go to the scatter, there's this thing which says call overlapping. So if we click that one, you're going to see that now we tell the sugar, hey, we don't want you to have another like sugar block close to you. And right now the setting here is 0.1. If we lower this to like 0.01, things are going to be a little bit closer. Let's try like a 0.0 of 5, for instance, and that way you're going to see that they're not really going to be touching, or they're going to be touching very, very slightly. This is something, again, I've seen people do this in Blender, where they try to, especially with the donut from Blender Guru, where they try to make sure that sprinkles don't overlap. But even on the geometry nodes, I think there's not a specific way to do that. This calling option right here allows us to get really, really, really close, as you can see right here. So yeah, we can play around, let's say like 0.03. Like I do want to have a little bit of overlap. This is, of course, going to reduce the amount of sugar that we have because we're going to have a little bit less sugar. That's pretty much it. Because there's going to be areas where things are really close together, and the calling will just erase some of those points. If you want to know how many points we have, there's an option here. I can go right click and say add a watch point. And this watch point, just add a watch point. There we go. This watch point is like information that's being fed into the graph. and you can see that right now we have 41,314 points rather than the 50,000, which was our original limit, because about 9,000 points are being called by the parameter that we changed right here on the calling. So okay, that it's all good and great, but can we make this thing look even better? Yes, we can make this thing look way better. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna do a random point rotation. What the random point rotation will do, and again we need to plug this out into the proxy so that we see it. It should, or actually before that, oops, go back. The random point rotation is not going to be after the instances, it's going to be before the instances. Order of operation is really important. Let's drag, press tab, and it's a randomized point rotation. And then this out points are going to go here. And as you can see now, all of our little guys are going to be rotating in a random way. And that's going to give us a lot more variability, is that the proper word, or more randomness on the whole setup. And then we can add another node here. Again, just drag, hit tab, and I'm going to say randomize point scale. We're going to get this into the points right here. So now, as you can see, some pieces are going to be really big and some are going to be really big, really small. So what we can say here is we already know that our limit is like 0.1, 0.5 to 0.15. We can say, well, from that, we're going to go from 0.5 to 1.5. So that means that we're going to have some big sugar elements and some small ones. Or we can go really low, say 0.1 and 0.8, for instance. And again, that's going to give us some really small like sugar cubes and some really big sugar cubes. And that's pretty much it. Here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the point scope. We don't need it anymore. I just want to see the sugar. And look how nice this looks. Again, it's 50,000 or 43,000 points, which is quite a bit. But we're getting this very nice effect. So I'm going to hit Control S. And we need to create a material for this before we show you the rendering thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create just a big cube right here, which is going to be my, let's call this my reference point, right? Because it's just a single object. I'm going to assign a new material. I'm going to Arnold AI standard surface, and this is going to be a sugar material, sugar MTL. And if I hit render, what we're going to see, very interestingly, is that we don't see the sugar, right? Like the sugar cover that we did with Bifrost and that we're seeing on the viewport, we're not seeing it on the render because we have not connected something that's really important yet. So we have this guy right here. Let's give it a look so that it looks like sugar. And this is the final shader that I want to talk about, which is the transmission shader. Yesterday we talked about the basic color shader. We talked about the basic specular shader. Well, the transmission shader, or the transmission parameter of the shader, is the glass portion of things. So if we bring this all the way up, we're gonna get this glass effect. As you can see, we're getting this refraction and we're seeing through the little element. And we can play around with the roughness, for instance, to make this a little bit more rough. Right, so it's more like an opaque sort of effect, and I really want to go quite rough. Sugar usually has a lot of like elements, and there we go. So now you can see that starts looking a little bit more like sugar. If we want to push this a little bit further and make it look like whiter, right, like just a little bit more shiny, we can add like a sheen layer. Sheen is a way in which we can add like a little white, like extra bumpiness or extra shininess on certain things. We might not see it as much on this single one, but once we have more of them, it might be a little bit more obvious. So we have the material. Sugar material is ready. Two ways to do this. Technically, we can select the Bifrost network and just right-click, assign existing material, and assign the sugar material. We're now not going to see the elements because they're gone. But even if we try rendering now, it won't work. It won't work because if we go back here, you're going to see that this create instances, which is what's doing the whole magic, it's only set to the proxy. So we need to set this to the final as well. Okay. I'm gonna save again because, as I mentioned, this can get quite heavy. Let's go back into our camera. Panels, look to selected. There we go. We're gonna say Arnold, and let's try it. When I render, this is where my laptop crashed yesterday because when it tries to render 50,000 points with glass shaders, it can become quite tricky. But let's see if we can get this to work. I'm gonna pause real quick, wait for the render, and I'll show you if it worked or tell you if it crashed. Give me just 1 sec. Okay, guys, so I'm getting one interesting error right here, and I want to show you why this is happening or why I think it's happening. So as you can see, it says it's trying to go through all of the 40,000 points here, and saying property point emit location has unknown or unsupported type of a storage class. What does this mean? This means that for some reason it's having a little bit of a difficult time knowing where to place all of this. I tried changing this to an output, it didn't really work. I'm gonna go back to a terminal. What I'm gonna do here is we know that the instances are gonna be are gonna be on the final. We also know that we want to see them on the proxy. There we go. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the original bread right here, and I'm gonna bring the bread all the way to the proxy as well. See if that solves the issue that we're getting here. Let me make this thing a little bit bigger. Let me I'm just gonna do a quick render here. Let's see if that works now. We're still getting the same error as you can see here. I actually even changed this to CPU instead of GPU to see if we can get the render to work. And again, the problem is that for some reason Bifrost is not finding where to place all of these elements. Even though we do have the scatter thing and everything like properly set up, it's not letting this. So as you can see, as soon as this thing reaches 40 and whatever thousand, here's where we should see the elements, because again, we can see them on the viewport, but we're not seeing them on the render. It's quite puzzling. Let me just bring this thing here. Again, as I mentioned, maybe we need to keep the mesh as a proxy model, even though we're not going to see it at the end. Now, we're still getting... Okay, let me solve the issue real quick, and I'll be right back. You guys are not going to believe what the issue was. I spent the last, like, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes trying to find this. Oh, this is really crashing. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Maya crashed, and as I was saying, I spent the last like 15, 20 minutes trying to figure out what the hell was going on, because we were doing everything properly. The materials, everything, the assignment, everything was working exactly as intended, but for some reason it was not rendering. And after a couple of like here tweaks and there, I always use the I call it the rubber duck technique, which is you try to explain to yourself every single step and explain why things are not working the way they're supposed to be working. And I managed to discover what the problem was. So we did change this to an output geometry, and that's fine. That's gonna work exactly as intended. We did go here to the outliner and the Bifrost graph. We can right click and assign the material, which in this case is the sugar material. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to turn off the bread right here. We're going to keep this like this. Let's save real quick. And if we render, we should see the sugar. Just wait a couple of seconds here for the render to kick in. We're using CPU now to give this a little bit more time. And there we go. We have the sugar. And you can actually see it has this very nice like shininess to it, right? But why is it that when we turn the bread back on and we render, we no longer see the sugar? You guys figure it out? Have you guys found the answer? The answer is actually rather simple. The problem is that we have displacement, and the displacement is pushing the surface of the bread up. And right now, since we're keeping things simple, there's no way for the points to know that all of those points are being pushed, and therefore that the sugar is down. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to duplicate this guy, hide the first one, the pan-LP, which is the one that's using the sugar. And then this second one, I'm just going to scale it down like it's 9.52, let's say 9. And I'm going to have to like guesstimate at the proper size. But as you can see right there, now we can actually see the sugar beneath the bread, right? So it's not going to match perfectly. Another thing that I'm thinking that we could do is go to the displacement of this object, to the material displacement, and just change the intensity of the displacement. Let's see if that works as well. So I'm going to go here to the hypershade. Let's go to the displacement shader. If you remember, we had a displacement a scale of 0.03. Let's do 0.01. So quite low. Now, since the surface of the bread shouldn't be displacing as much, we should be seeing the crystals a little bit clearer. Now, another thing I'm thinking that could potentially work, again, just for this particular exercise, is we can go to the Bifrost graph again and not go super low on the scale. So here on the scale, I can say, hey, instead of 0.1 and 0.8, let's go like a point 0.8, or let's just go like 1.2 and zero point 0.2, right? Which we know this is going to be quite big, but again, it should be like balancing off the fact that that the bread's going to be pushing forward. So let's see if this works. Technically, since the chunks of sugar are a little bit bigger, we should see them pushing through the surface. And I can see a couple of like white things here and there. Another thing we can do is we know that the displacement is pushing things up, right? So if it's pushing things up, again, if we go to the graph, the same way we have this point scale, we can do something called transform points or translate points. And on the translation, we want to, can we assign, actually don't know the I don't know the proper I don't know the proper thing here. Maybe on the scatter, that's another thing. Maybe sometimes there's an option to like push the elements a little bit more. I don't see it here. I'm just gonna go to the cubes here and make this bigger. So on the create mesh cube, let's try like 0.1 and 0.3. Let's give that a shot. I have to do more research to make sure to understand how to use the displacement to push things as well. But right now, again, we're just trying to find a way to make sure that the glass or the sugar is like, it looks like it's like embedded on the bread, and still not enough. As you can see, even with that big scale, we're not seeing the sugar. So one final thing that I can think of right now is just going to the bread itself again and pretty much removing the displacement. Like again, we have a scale of 0.01. Let's try 0.001, like super small scale. And technically, since the displacement shouldn't be as strong, the surface of the object shouldn't be like moving that much. We should start seeing the sugar like going through here. I know that my image is freezing. Hopefully, the audio is not freezing. So let me try and see if we can change back to GPU. Give that a shot. GPU usually allows me to keep the recording going because we're not using as much of the processor. I mean, GPU is working, but again, still see that the displacement is not letting us um, generate what we want. So I'm just gonna delete the displacement. Let's get rid of the displacement for now, and let's see if this works now. See how this looks. I'm gonna pause real quick, guys, and I'll let you see the result after this render is done. Okay, so I did a small change here to the sugar because I was not able to see the sugar. It seems like the refraction that we were using was not great. But there we go. So as you can see, this is just the normal, like the sugar material is just a normal Lambert material. I'm going to stop this one right here, and I'm going to tweak the size of the sugar first here again on the dimensions. So let's try like zero point 0.5 and 1.5. Now that we don't have the, what's the word? The displacement, this should look a little bit better. And again, if I knew a little bit more about Bifrost, I'm sure we can use a node to push the sugar crystals up so that we match the displacement of the object a little bit closer. But right now, my knowledge is still limited. I just want to get a nice looking render out of this. There's still a couple of things I want to show you about the camera. We'll do this as soon as we solve the sugar. Sorry if this video is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's going to be a couple of hiccups here and there because this is on the limit of my knowledge. These are things that I'm not super familiar with. Whoa! The hell? Oh, yeah, it's too big, right? My bad. So it's 0.15 and 0.05. Try that. It takes longer to render because even though everything is instance, the computer still needs to load all of the geometries that we're using. So 50,000 points or 43,000 points, multiply that by 6, and that's the amount of elements that we're getting. The cool thing is that this is only happening at render time, right? So we're not actually having to calculate all of these points on the viewport, and that's why um, this system is so efficient, because we only need to worry about the render, which, as you can definitely see here, it's taking longer than usual, even on a strong computer. There we go. That's a little bit better, I would say, in regards to size. I like the size of this one. And now we can play a little bit with the transmission. Maybe not go full transmission, just a little, because again, if we go full transmission, we're not gonna see anything. But if we just add a little bit of transmission, let's bring the roughness down. I want this to be glossy and shiny, and let's see how this looks. This should give us a semi-transparent object that hopefully will look close to sugar. Let's see if it works. Okay, it doesn't work because of the transmission. Let's bring the transmission all the way up. It's not like being able to process like the proper. I think this is the GPU now crashing. That's weird. Let me close this, and I'm gonna becoming a bit more challenging than I thought. See, guys, even I am learning. Now I'm trying to learn about new stuff. Stop the render again. Let me keep tweaking, guys. I don't want to waste your time, so I'm gonna keep tweaking. This is just gonna be a quick hiccup for you on the video, and I'll show you the final thing and what I did. Well, so yeah, this has been a really bad experience for me, to be honest. I'm sorry if I thought I was prepared to attack any of the issues that we might have faced, but apparently not. So these were the settings that I was able to find that I kind of like. Unfortunately, the GPU does not work as intended. If I change this to GPU and I try to render, we get a black square, which pretty much tells me that the GPU can't handle as many instances. So we need to do CPU, and here you can see that we actually get something, but now we have no camera. So I'm gonna stop it. So yeah, this is pretty much it, guys. Now I'm gonna let this thing render and get like the final result. I just want to add a couple of things. Of course, we're gonna be adding the denoiser and the. Oh well. Yeah, I don't know what to say, guys. This is probably the worst video I've done for the channel because it's full of errors and crashes and yeah, I apologize. I don't want to erase this because I actually do want to show you that it's not always like it's not you don't always get like things working exactly as you want. So yeah. Let's see if I can. Let me see if I can get this file. It seems like it did save a recovered file right here. So I'm gonna save real quick. Oh, there's no changes to save. I'm gonna go to Arnold. Let's open the render view. And we do have the denoiser, and I am gonna add a what's the word? A lens effect, and I want to add just a little bit of vignette, or something like that. Give it a go and see if it works. So it does seem to be working. As you can see, the vignette there helps a little bit. We get this sort of like photographic effect. I'm not in love with the sugar, to be honest, but I wanted to show you the Bifrost and scatter thing. Let me know in the comments if this is something that's interesting to you guys. I know it's very complex, and as I've mentioned, it is something completely new to me. That's why I'm struggling so much. But there you go. Now you got a fun video to see me struggle and have a hard time with Maya. I'm gonna stop the video right here, guys. If you liked it or not, just let me know. Like, share, subscribe, comment. You know the drill. I'm just gonna wait for this render to finish, and I'll I'll wrap this up. Tomorrow, I think we'll either work with the mask or something else. But yeah, let's keep going. Next couple of days, we're gonna have the results for the contest. Don't worry about that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this one, guys. I'll see you back on the next one. Bye bye.